The food stamps fell from my wallet right onto the grocery store counter, scattered like my dignity across the black conveyor belt. The woman behind me in line, designer purse, manicured nails, took one look and pulled her cart back 3 feet, as if poverty might be contagious. My 16-year-old daughter Emma pretended not to notice. Bless her heart, but I caught her cheeks turning red as she bagged our discount bread and marked down milk. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. I'm Frank Morrison, and if you think being a single dad is tough, try being a broke single dad in Charleston, South Carolina, where everyone else seems to drive BMWs to pick up their kids from soccer practice. I've been raising Emma alone for almost 15 years, ever since my wife Sarah lost her battle with cancer when Emma had just turned 2. 3 jobs keep us afloat: night security at the hospital, weekend landscaping for the country club folks who look right through me, and morning shift stocking shelves at Henderson's Market. It's not glamorous, but it pays for Emma's school supplies and the occasional movie night when I can scrape together $20. That particular Tuesday started like any other disaster. My alarm didn't go off because the power had been cut for 2 hours during the night. Apparently, our neighbors got tired of me borrowing electricity through an extension cord from the hallway outlet. Emma had already left for school, probably walking the 4 miles because I couldn't afford to fix the truck's transmission. Again, the bus ride downtown was my daily reminder that life has a sense of humor, and that sense of humor is cruel. I sat in the back trying to make myself invisible while texting my boss that I'd be 5 minutes late. That's when I noticed the elderly woman struggling to board at Broad Street. She was small, maybe 75, wearing a worn winter coat despite the Charleston heat. Her hands shook as she searched through a tiny purse that looked like it hadn't been new since the Carter administration. The bus driver, a man whose patience had clearly left the building around the Clinton administration, drummed his fingers on the wheel. "Lady, I don't have all day. You got the fare or not?" That's when Emma appeared from the front of the bus like some kind of teenage angel. I hadn't even seen her board. Apparently, she'd caught an earlier bus after all. "Here," Emma said quietly, fishing 2 crumpled dollar bills from her backpack pocket, money I'd given her for lunch. "This should cover it." The old woman looked up with eyes that seemed to carry decades of stories. "Oh, honey, I can't take your lunch money." "It's fine," Emma insisted, her voice gentle but firm. "I packed an extra sandwich today anyway." Which was complete nonsense. I'd seen her make exactly 1 peanut butter sandwich that morning, and she'd carefully wrapped it like it was made of gold. The woman accepted the money with trembling fingers, then shuffled toward the back of the bus. She chose the seat directly across from me, and I found myself studying her face. Something about her expression struck me as odd. Not grateful exactly, but almost calculating, like she was filing away every detail of what had just happened. Emma slid into the seat next to me, and I put my arm around her shoulders. "That was sweet, kiddo, but you know we can't afford to be giving away lunch money." She shrugged. She needed it more than I needed a second sandwich. I wanted to lecture her about practical versus emotional decisions, about how you can't save everyone when you can barely save yourself. Instead, I found myself thinking about Sarah, and how she would have done exactly the same thing. Emma had inherited her mother's heart, for better or worse. The old woman spent the entire ride stealing glances at us. Not suspicious glances, more like she was solving a puzzle. When we reached downtown, she struggled to her feet and made her way slowly toward the front. As she passed our seat, she stopped and placed a weathered hand on Emma's shoulder. "Thank you, dear," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "Your kindness won't be forgotten." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of morning commuters like she'd never existed at all. Emma spent the rest of the ride asking me questions about homelessness, about why some people have so little, while others have so much. I gave her the standard dad answers. Life isn't fair, work hard, stay in school, but honestly, I was wondering the same things myself. What I didn't know, what none of us could have predicted, was that our random act of bus fare kindness had just set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. 3 days later, the old woman was back. I was working my morning shift at Henderson's Market, arranging discount produce and trying to make week-old lettuce look appealing, when I spotted her near the bread aisle. Same worn coat, same unsteady gait, but something was different. She was watching me work with an intensity that made my neck prickle. When I caught her eye, she smiled and waved like we were old friends, which we definitely weren't. I might remember faces, but I sure as hell remember my bank balance, and it doesn't include funds for making new senior citizen buddies. She approached slowly, pushing a cart that held exactly 3 items: a loaf of day-old bread, a can of soup, and a small container of milk. "Frank Morrison," she said, and my blood went cold. I hadn't told her my name on the bus. "I was hoping I'd run into you." I set down the bananas I'd been arranging and faced her directly. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be rude, but how do you know my name?" Her smile was mysterious, almost mischievous. "Small town, dear. Word gets around, especially about good people." She paused, studying my face. "I'm Margaret Whitman, by the way. I wanted to properly thank you and your daughter for the other day. Emma's the one you should thank. And honestly, ma'am, it was just bus fare. Nothing worth tracking people down for." Margaret. I still thought of her as the struggling old lady, because that's what she appeared to be. Tilted her head slightly. "You'd be surprised what some people consider worthless, Frank, and what others recognize as priceless." The way she said it gave me goosebumps, but not the good kind. More like the kind you get when someone's playing a game and you don't know the rules. She purchased her 3 items, paying with exact change counted out slowly from a small change purse. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to me. "Frank, I know this might sound odd, but would you and Emma like to join me for dinner sometime this week? Nothing fancy, just a home-cooked meal. It gets lonely eating alone every night." Every instinct I had screamed, stranger danger. This woman had sought me out, somehow learned my name, and now wanted to feed us. In the carefully structured world of a single parent, this was how horror movies started. But then I looked at her. Really looked. The tremor in her hands wasn't fake. The worn coat wasn't a costume. And something in her eyes reminded me of Emma's expression when she'd handed over her lunch money. Hope, maybe, or the desire to connect with someone else's humanity. "Mrs. Whitman," I said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but Emma and I don't really know you well enough for dinner invitations." She nodded, unsurprised by my response. "Of course, I understand completely. Perhaps we could start smaller, coffee, or maybe I could buy Emma lunch as a proper thank you for her kindness." The lunch offer got my attention. Emma had been skipping meals more often lately, claiming she wasn't hungry when I knew damn well she was just trying to stretch our grocery budget. The practical side of my brain, the side that had kept us afloat for 15 years, started calculating the value of a free meal. "Let me think about it," I said finally. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a small piece of paper. "My phone number," she said, handing it to me. "In case you change your mind." I glanced at the paper. The handwriting was shaky, but the phone number was local. No area code, just 7 digits the way old-timers still wrote them. After she left, I spent the rest of my shift thinking about the encounter. Something wasn't adding up. The woman dressed like she was counting pennies, shopped like she was on food stamps, but carried herself with a confidence that spoke of someone accustomed to getting her way. Plus, there was the matter of her somehow knowing my name and where I worked. That evening, I mentioned the encounter to Emma while we shared a dinner of reheated pizza and canned green beans. "She wants to take us to dinner?" Emma's face lit up. "Dad, that's so sweet. She seemed really nice on the bus." "Sweet or not, kiddo, we don't know anything about her. For all we know, she could be some kind of con artist." Emma gave me that look, the one that said I was being paranoid and cynical, which fair enough, I probably was. "Dad, she's like 70 years old and weighs 90 pounds. What's she going to do, overpower us with her cane?" "Emma, trust me, age and size don't determine someone's capacity for causing trouble. Some of the most dangerous people I've met looked completely harmless." She was quiet for a moment, twirling green beans around her fork. "You know what Mom would have said about this?" My chest tightened. Emma rarely brought up her mother directly, but when she did, it always hit like a punch to the gut. What would she have said? She would have said that kindness creates more kindness, that when someone extends a hand, you take it, because you never know when you might need someone to extend a hand to you. Damn. Sometimes my 16-year-old daughter sounded wiser than her old man, which was both impressive and terrifying. "You really want to have dinner with a stranger?" I asked. "I want to have dinner where I don't have to pretend I'm not still hungry afterward," she said quietly. And there it was. The truth that we both danced around but never quite acknowledged. We were barely getting by and everyone knew it, including Emma. I pulled Margaret's phone number from my wallet and stared at the shaky handwriting. What's the worst that could happen? Margaret Whitman lived in a house that didn't match anything I'd assumed about her. The address she'd given us led to Magnolia Street, just off King Street downtown. an area where historic charm meets serious property taxes. The house itself was a narrow Charleston single house, probably built in the 1800s, with a wraparound porch and gardens that looked like someone actually paid attention to them. Emma and I stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, double-checking the address. "Dad?" Emma whispered. "Are you sure we have the right place?" I checked the paper again. Same number, same street. Either we do, or Margaret gave us the wrong address accidentally. Or on purpose, I thought, but didn't say. Because the woman who lived here wasn't counting change for bus fare. This was easily a $1 million property in one of Charleston's most desirable neighborhoods. I knocked on the front door, half expecting a housekeeper or someone else entirely to answer. Instead, Margaret opened the door herself, wearing the same worn coat but somehow looking different. More at home in her own skin, maybe. "Frank." "Emma." Right on time, she stepped aside to usher us in. "I hope you found the place easily enough." The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Hardwood floors that gleamed, antique furniture that looked original rather than reproduction, and artwork on the walls that definitely wasn't purchased at department stores. But what struck me most was how lived in it felt. This wasn't a show house. It was someone's carefully maintained home. "Mrs. Whitman," I said slowly, "this is a beautiful house." She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, the smile looked completely genuine rather than carefully calculated. "Thank you. I've lived here for nearly 40 years. My late husband purchased it as a fixer-upper and we spent decades getting it just right." Emma was practically bouncing on her toes, taking in every detail. "It's like a museum, but comfortable." "That's exactly what I was hoping for," Margaret said. "Now I hope you both like pot roast. It's been cooking all afternoon." The dining room table was set with china that looked like it belonged in an antique store, and the pot roast was accompanied by homemade bread, roasted vegetables, and what appeared to be a genuine chocolate cake for dessert. As we ate, Margaret asked Emma questions about school, her interests, her plans for the future. Normal dinner conversation, except for the way she listened to the answers, like she was filing away every detail for future reference. "So you want to study environmental science in college?" Margaret said, cutting another piece of cake for Emma. "That's wonderful. The world needs more young people who care about the planet's future." "Well," Emma said, her voice becoming quieter, "I want to study it. Whether I'll be able to afford college is a different question." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Emma, we've talked about this. We'll figure out the college thing when the time comes." Margaret's expression sharpened with interest. "Financial aid isn't sufficient?" "Mrs. Whitman," I said firmly, "Emma's college plans aren't really appropriate dinner conversation with someone we've just met." But Margaret wasn't deterred. "Frank, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I've been thinking about your kindness on the bus, about how your daughter gave up her lunch money without a second thought." Here it comes, I thought. The sales pitch. Whatever this woman was really after, we were about to find out. "That's just how we raised her," I said carefully. "To help people when she can." "Yes, but there's a difference between helping when it's convenient and helping when it costs you something." Emma helped when she could least afford to. Margaret set down her coffee cup with a deliberate clink against the saucer. "I'd like to help her in return." Emma looked between us, her eyes wide. I felt my protective instincts kicking into high gear. "Ma'am, that's very kind, but we don't accept charity." "Who said anything about charity?" Margaret's voice took on an edge I hadn't heard before, sharper, more authoritative. "I'm talking about recognizing potential when I see it." She stood up and walked to an antique secretary desk in the corner of the dining room, returning with a manila folder. "Frank, what do you know about the Whitman Foundation?" I blinked. Should I know about it? Margaret opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. The Whitman Foundation is a charitable organization that provides educational scholarships to deserving students. Students who demonstrate not just academic potential, but character. She slid a brochure across the table to me. The cover showed the foundation's logo and the text, "Investing in Tomorrow's Leaders Since 1962. The foundation was established by my late husband, Charles Whitman, 60 years ago. Since then, we've provided full scholarships to over 2,000 students. I picked up the brochure with hands that weren't entirely steady. Inside were photos of scholarship recipients, their accomplishments, their success stories. At the bottom of the last page, in small print, For more information, contact Margaret Whitman, Foundation Director. You're not just a random old lady, I said quietly. Margaret's smile was patient, almost kind. Frank, I haven't been a random anything for a very long time. Emma was staring at the brochure like it might disappear if she blinked. Mrs. Whitman, are you saying? I'm saying that your kindness on the bus caught my attention. I make it a point to observe how people behave when they think no one's watching, or when they think no one important is watching. The weight of what she was suggesting hit me like a freight train. You were testing us. I was getting to know you, Margaret corrected. There's a difference. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief rising in my chest. So this whole thing, the struggling to pay bus fare, the 3 items at the grocery store, all of it, was performance? Margaret's expression didn't change. Frank, I have more money than I can spend in several lifetimes. But money attracts the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of people. Sometimes to find genuinely good people, you have to be creative in your approach. Emma found her voice. You're really offering me a scholarship? I'm offering you the opportunity to apply for one, Margaret said. The foundation has strict standards, but based on what I've observed, I think you'd be an excellent candidate. I looked at my daughter's face, saw the hope and excitement there, and felt my cynical heart breaking a little. Because this was either the best thing that had ever happened to us, or we were about to be crushed by disappointment. What's the catch? I asked. Margaret folded her hands on the table. The catch, Frank, is that if Emma is accepted, the scholarship comes with certain expectations. The expectations, as it turned out, were more complex than I'd bargained for. Margaret cleared the dinner dishes herself, waving away our offers to help, and led us into what she called her study. It was a room lined floor to ceiling with books, dominated by an enormous mahogany desk that probably cost more than my annual salary. Please sit, she said, gesturing toward 2 leather chairs that looked like they belonged in a gentleman's club from the 1920s. Emma perched on the edge of her chair like she was afraid to fully settle in. I remained standing, arms crossed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Margaret pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the first. The Whitman Foundation doesn't simply write checks for tuition, Frank. We invest in young people who demonstrate the potential to make meaningful contributions to their communities. She opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be a contract. Scholarship recipients agree to certain conditions. They maintain a minimum GPA, participate in community service projects, and commit to mentoring younger students in their final 2 years. That sounds reasonable, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's more, Margaret continued. Recipients also agree to return to Charleston after graduation and work in their field of study for a minimum of 5 years. We believe in investing in local talent and keeping that talent local. I felt my protective instincts flaring again. You're asking a 16-year-old to sign her life away for the next 9 years. Margaret's gaze shifted to me, and for the first time I saw something steel-hard beneath her grandmotherly exterior. I'm offering her an opportunity that most people would kill for, Frank. Full tuition, room and board at any accredited university, plus a living stipend and funding for research projects. She pulled out another document and slid it across the desk. At the top, in bold letters, scholarship value $400,000. Emma made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. $400,000. That was more money than I'd make in 15 years of working all 3 jobs. Hell, it was more money than most people in Charleston saw in their entire lifetimes. Mrs. Whitman, I said carefully. Why Emma? You met her once for 5 minutes on a city bus. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying both of us. Frank, I've been running this foundation for 42 years. In that time, I've learned to recognize certain qualities quickly. Intelligence, yes, but more importantly, character. She stood and walked to one of the bookshelves, pulling down a thick photo album. Every scholarship recipient has their picture in here, she said, opening the album and turning it so we could see. Doctors, teachers, engineers, business owners. All of them started where Emma is right now. Young people with potential but limited opportunities. The photos showed decades of graduation ceremonies, young faces beaming with pride, older photos of the same people in professional settings. But here's what they all had in common, Margaret continued. When given the choice between self-interest and helping others, they chose to help, just like Emma did on the bus. Emma was staring at the photo album like it held the secrets of the universe. Mrs. Whitman, I don't understand why you were on the bus in the first place. If you're wealthy enough to give away this kind of money. Margaret closed the album and smiled. Excellent question. The truth is, I ride public transportation regularly. Not out of necessity, but as a way of observing how people interact with each other when they think no one important is watching. She returned to her seat. Most people ignore elderly passengers who are struggling. Some get annoyed. A few offer help, but only when others are watching. Emma helped immediately, quietly, and without expecting recognition. So this was all a setup, I said, and I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. Frank, life is full of tests. Most of the time, we don't know we're being tested until after we've passed or failed. I simply make those tests more intentional. Margaret pulled out yet another document. Which brings me to my second proposal. Here we go, I thought. The real agenda. Frank, the foundation doesn't just support students. We also provide grants to family members who demonstrate the same qualities we look for in our scholarship recipients. She slid the document toward me. At the top, Family Support Grant Application. What kind of support? I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. Educational grants for adults returning to school, business loans for promising small business ventures, emergency assistance for unexpected medical bills or family crises. Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was reading from a grocery list rather than describing life-changing amounts of money. And in exchange, nothing illegal, nothing unethical, and nothing that compromises your values, she said. Simply a willingness to help the foundation identify other families who might benefit from our programs. I stared at the application, my mind racing. This felt like the kind of offer that came with invisible strings attached. The kind of deal that seemed too good to be true because it usually was. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement in her chair. Dad, this could change everything for us. That was exactly what I was afraid of. Margaret seemed to sense my hesitation. Frank, I understand your caution. Truly. But consider this. You've been raising an exceptional young woman under difficult circumstances for 15 years. Don't you think you both deserve a break? She had a point. A big one. For 15 years, I'd been working 3 jobs, skipping meals, and watching my daughter pretend she didn't notice that we couldn't afford the same things as her classmates. How many more years could we keep living paycheck to paycheck, hoping nothing went wrong with my health or the economy or the dozens of other fragile things that kept us barely afloat? Can we think about it? I asked finally. Margaret nodded. Of course, take all the time you need. But Frank, yes? Emma's deadline for college applications is in 6 months. The foundation's scholarship decisions are made in April. Time isn't unlimited. As we prepared to leave, Margaret handed Emma a business card. My direct number, she explained. Feel free to call if you have any questions about the program or the application process. On the card, beneath her name, Neath, was a single line. Margaret Whitman, Foundation Director. No fancy titles, no elaborate letterhead, just a name and a phone number. As we walked to the bus stop, Emma was practically skipping with excitement. Dad, can you believe it? A full scholarship. We could actually afford college. I was thinking about the look in Margaret's eyes when she'd mentioned expectations, about the way she'd known exactly where I worked and when to find me there, about the fact that a woman with this kind of money was riding public buses to scout for worthy recipients of her generosity. Emma, I said as we waited for the bus, if this sounds too good to be true, it probably is, she finished. I know, Dad. But what if it isn't? What if this is just someone who wants to help? As the bus pulled up, I found myself hoping my 16-year-old daughter was right and my 42 years of experience were wrong. Because if Margaret Whitman was legitimate, she'd just offered us a way out of the financial hole we'd been digging for 15 years. And if she wasn't legitimate, she'd just dangled everything we'd ever wanted in front of us, which meant the fall was going to hurt like hell. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after our dinner with Margaret. I was on my second cup of gas station coffee, getting ready for a landscaping job at one of the country club estates when my phone rang. Unknown number, unknown, but something made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail. Frank Morrison? The voice was crisp, professional. Definitely not Margaret's gentle tone. Speaking, this is James Patterson, attorney for the Whitman Foundation. Mrs. Whitman has asked me to contact you regarding Emma's scholarship application and your family support grant. My stomach dropped into my work boots. When lawyers start calling at dawn on Saturday mornings, it's never good news. Is there a problem with the application? Not exactly a problem, Patterson said. More of a complication. Are you available to meet today? There are some aspects of Mrs. Whitman's proposal that require clarification. What kind of complications? Mr. Morrison, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Would noon work for you? My office is downtown on Broad Street. I glanced at the clock. The landscaping job would take most of the morning, but I could be downtown by noon if I hustled. I'll be there. Patterson's office was in one of those historic Charleston buildings that scream expensive legal work, the kind of place where billable hours start at $500 and go up from there. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she ironed her hair every morning, led me to a conference room with windows overlooking Charleston Harbor. Patterson was waiting with a stack of documents that looked thick enough to choke a horse. Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming. Patterson was maybe 50, with the kind of tan that comes from weekend sailing rather than outdoor manual labor. Please sit. He opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be a contract. Before we begin, I want to make sure you understand the scope of what Mrs. Whitman is proposing. $400,000 for Emma's education plus family support grants, that's what she told us. That's correct, but incomplete. Patterson slid the contract across the table. The Whitman Foundation is prepared to offer your family a comprehensive support package valued at approximately $800,000 over the next 10 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. $800,000. I'd never even said a number that large out loud, let alone imagined it applying to my life. What's the catch? I managed to ask. Patterson's expression became carefully neutral. Mrs. Whitman has certain expectations regarding how foundation recipients integrate into Charleston's civic and social communities. He pulled out another document. Emma would be expected to maintain a public presence as a foundation scholarship recipient, speaking engagements at local schools, participation in foundation events, serving as a mentor and role model for other potential recipients. That sounds reasonable. There's more. Patterson's tone became more formal. Mrs. Whitman also expects family members who receive support to become active in specific community organizations. Fundraising events, volunteer work, serving on nonprofit boards. I felt the first warning bells going off in my head. What kind of organizations? Patterson consulted his notes. The Charleston Historical Society, the Magnolia Foundation for Historic Preservation, the South Carolina Educational Reform Initiative, and several others. And if we don't want to participate in those organizations, then the foundation's support would be reconsidered. There it was. The catch I'd been waiting for. Mr. Patterson, are you telling me that in exchange for this money, Mrs. Whitman expects to control how we spend our time? Patterson's expression remained carefully professional. Mrs. Whitman believes that investment in individuals should include investment in their commitment to community service. That's not community service. That's social obligation. I leaned back in my chair. What else? Patterson hesitated, then pulled out one more document. Mrs. Whitman has also expressed interest in having Emma spend summers working for foundation-affiliated businesses during her college years. What kind of businesses? Whitman Industries owns several companies in Charleston: real estate development, hospitality, retail. Emma would gain valuable work experience while contributing to the local economy. The picture was becoming clearer, and I didn't like what I was seeing. Margaret Whitman wasn't offering us help. She was offering to purchase our lives. Mr. Patterson, does Mrs. Whitman own any property in the area where Emma and I currently live? Patterson consulted another file. Whitman Industries does own several properties in that neighborhood, yes. Including our apartment building? Yes. Son of a bitch. I should have seen this coming. Let me guess, I said. Mrs. Whitman has plans for that neighborhood. Development plans. And families like mine, longtime residents who might oppose changes, are obstacles to those plans. Patterson's silence was answer enough. So the scholarship, the grants, the community service, it's all about getting us bought into whatever she has planned for our neighborhood. Mr. Morrison, I think you're misinterpreting. Am I? Because it sounds like Mrs. Whitman identified a family with influence in a neighborhood she wants to develop and figured out how to purchase our cooperation. I stood up from the conference table. What happens if we say no to all of this? Patterson's expression became uncomfortable. The foundation's offers would be withdrawn, obviously. And our apartment? I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm implying that if we don't take Mrs. Whitman's generous offer, we might find our rent increasing dramatically. Or our lease might not be renewed, or the building might suddenly need renovations that require all tenants to relocate. Patterson didn't deny it, which told me everything I needed to know. I picked up the contracts and walked toward the door. Tell Mrs. Whitman that the Morrison family appreciates her interest, but we're not for sale. Mr. Morrison, Patterson called after me. I hope you understand the magnitude of what you're declining. Opportunities like this don't come along often. I turned back to face him. Neither do families who can't be bought. As I walked out of that expensive office building, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from rage. Margaret Whitman had played us perfectly, identified our desperation, offered us everything we'd ever dreamed of, and then revealed the true price. But here's the thing about growing up poor and staying poor despite working 3 jobs. You develop a very finely tuned sense for when someone is trying to manipulate you. And Margaret Whitman had just triggered every alarm bell I possessed. I had a phone call to make to Emma, because my 16-year-old daughter was about to learn one of life's hardest lessons. Sometimes the most expensive gifts come with the highest prices. And sometimes walking away from everything you've ever wanted is the only way to keep everything you truly value. The question was, would Emma see it that way? Or would she see her father as the man who threw away her future out of stubborn pride? I was about to find out. The eviction notice was taped to our apartment door when Emma and I got home from her Saturday shift at the local library. Bright yellow paper, official seal, 30 days to vacate. The reason listed was property renovations requiring full tenant relocation. Signed by Patterson, Henderson and Associates, the same law firm I'd walked out of 3 days earlier. Dad? Emma's voice was small as she read over my shoulder. What does this mean? I crumpled the notice in my fist. It means Margaret Whitman doesn't like being told no. The timing wasn't coincidental. Neither was the fact that our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had the same yellow paper on her door, and the Johnsons across the hall, and pretty much every apartment in our building that housed families who'd been there longer than 5 years. Can she do this? Emma asked as we went inside. Legally, probably. She owns the building, and if she claims it needs major renovations, she can clear everyone out. I tossed my work jacket on the kitchen table harder than necessary. Morally, that's a different question. Emma sat down on our second-hand couch, the same one we'd bought when she was 10, and I'd finally saved enough for furniture that wasn't from yard sales. Dad, maybe we should reconsider her offer. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. At 16, she was already showing signs of the woman she'd become. Sarah's eyes, her mother's determination, but also something I recognized from looking in the mirror. The weight of carrying more responsibility than someone her age should have to handle. Emma, what did I teach you about people who try to corner you into making decisions? That they're usually not offering you what they claim to be offering, she recited. But Dad, what if she really is just trying to help? What if we're wrong about her motives? Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. Not the polite knock of a neighbor, but the authoritative rap of someone who expected to be answered immediately. I opened the door to find 2 men in expensive suits. The shorter one held a clipboard. The taller one held what appeared to be a tablet computer. Mr. Morrison, I'm David Walsh from Whitman Property Management. We're here to schedule your move-out inspection. Our what now? Walsh consulted his clipboard. Standard procedure when tenants receive relocation notices. We need to document the current condition of the unit and discuss the relocation assistance package. Relocation assistance? The taller man stepped forward. Mrs. Whitman wants to make sure all displaced families receive adequate support during this transition. We're prepared to offer first month's rent and security deposit for comparable housing in the area. It sounded generous until I considered what comparable housing meant for a family with my income. We'd be looking at apartments farther from downtown, farther from Emma's school, farther from the bus lines that connected to my jobs. And if we refuse the assistance, Walsh's expression remained professionally neutral. That's your choice, of course. But without the assistance package, you'd need to handle all moving expenses and deposits on your own. How thoughtful of Mrs. Whitman to plan for our welfare. Neither man reacted to my sarcasm. They'd probably dealt with plenty of displaced tenants who weren't thrilled about being relocated for the greater good of property development. Mr. Morrison, Walsh continued, I should mention that Mrs. Whitman has specifically instructed us to ensure your family receives priority consideration for the assistance package. She's quite concerned about your daughter's educational stability. There it was again. Margaret's apparent obsession with Emma's well-being, wrapped up in the language of civic responsibility. After the men left, Emma and I sat at our kitchen table and tried to figure out our options. On paper, they weren't impressive. I had enough saved to cover a security deposit on a cheaper apartment, but finding one that would accept our application, single father, multiple jobs, no guarantees, wouldn't be easy. Dad, Emma said quietly, what if we call Mrs. Whitman directly? What if we try to negotiate something that works for everyone? I almost laughed. Kiddo, people like Margaret Whitman don't negotiate. They present options and wait for you to choose the one they wanted you to pick all along. But Emma wasn't giving up. What if you're wrong? What if she really does just want to help, and we're making this harder than it needs to be? That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat in our kitchen and did something I hadn't done since Sarah died. I seriously considered whether my pride was more important than my daughter's future. Margaret's offer was still on the table, as far as I knew. $400,000 for Emma's education, plus family support that could set us up for life. All we had to do was play along with whatever community involvement she expected, smile and wave at foundation events, and pretend to be grateful for the privilege of being purchased. I thought about Emma working at the library for $8 an hour, saving every penny for college applications she might not be able to afford to submit. I thought about myself at 65, still working 3 jobs because I'd never been able to save enough for retirement. I thought about what Sarah would have said about choosing financial security over personal principles. Then I thought about the look in Margaret's eyes when she'd talked about expectations, the way Patterson had avoided my questions about what would happen if we declined the offer, the perfectly timed eviction notice that appeared 3 days after I'd walked out of his office. Some prices are too high to pay, even when you can't afford not to pay them. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a tenants' rights organization downtown. They couldn't stop the eviction, but they could make sure Whitman Property Management followed proper legal procedures and gave us the full 30 days we were entitled to. The second call was to my buddy Jake, who worked construction and had mentioned his boss was looking for reliable help on a big renovation project downtown. Better pay than my current jobs, though it meant giving up the security of regular employment. Morrison? Jake's voice boomed through the phone. Please tell me you're finally ready to do some real work instead of stocking shelves and mowing rich people's lawns. I might be. What's the job? Historic renovation on King Street. Big money client wants an entire building restored to original condition. Skilled work, good pay, but it's contract work. No guarantees beyond this project. I looked around our apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture and patched walls that had been home for 8 years. Sometimes you have to tear things down before you can build them back up properly. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. And Frank, don't make me regret recommending you. After I hung up, I found Emma in the kitchen making breakfast with ingredients that would probably last us another 3 days. Dad, you look different. Did something happen? Yeah, I said, pouring myself coffee from a pot that had seen better decades. I found us a way forward that doesn't involve selling our souls to Margaret Whitman. Emma's face lit up with hope and concern in equal measure. What kind of way forward? The kind that requires us to rebuild everything from scratch. But this time, we'll own what we build. What I didn't tell her was that I'd also made a third decision. If Margaret Whitman wanted to play hardball with a working-class family, she was about to learn that some people fight harder when they have nothing left to lose. The construction site on King Street turned out to be 3 buildings down from Margaret's historic house. I realized this on my first morning, when I arrived at 7 a.m. and found myself staring directly at her wraparound porch while drinking coffee from a thermos that had seen more construction sites than most people see in a lifetime. Jake noticed me staring. You know that place? Met the owner recently. She's memorable. Margaret Whitman? Yeah, she's the money behind this whole project. Jake gestured at the building we'd be renovating. Once it turned into high-end condos for downtown professionals. Good work if you can stomach dealing with rich people's detailed opinions about crown molding. She actually asked about you yesterday, seemed to know you'd be working here. She asked about me? Said she'd heard through the grapevine that you were joining the crew. Small town. You know how word gets around. Of course. Margaret wasn't just displacing families from affordable housing. She was simultaneously creating expensive housing for the kind of people who could afford to live in renovated historic buildings. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now working on the very project that represented everything I objected to about her approach to community development. Problem with that? Jake asked, noticing my expression. Just appreciating the cosmic humor of the situation. The work itself was satisfying in a way that stocking shelves and trimming hedges had never been. Historic restoration required actual skill, attention to detail, and problem-solving abilities that made me remember why I'd originally trained as a carpenter before life got in the way. By lunch break, I was covered in plaster dust and feeling more useful than I had in months. That's when Margaret appeared. She walked onto the construction site like she owned it, which, technically, she probably did, wearing a cream-colored dress and carrying a clipboard. The other workers immediately straightened up and tried to look busy. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying that same deceptive gentleness I remembered from our dinner. I wanted to check on the progress and see if there are any concerns. Her eyes found mine across the work area, and her expression shifted subtly. Not surprise exactly, but something more calculating. "Frank Morrison," she said, walking directly toward me. "I should have known I'd find you here." Jake looked between us with interest. "You two know each other?" "Mrs. Whitman and I have had some business discussions," I said carefully. Margaret's smile was sharper than it had been at dinner. "How is Emma adjusting to the prospect of finding new housing?" The question was asked loudly enough for the other workers to hear, which wasn't an accident. Margaret was establishing context, making sure everyone present understood that she held power over my family's living situation. "She's resilient," I replied. "We both are." "Of course. I'd expect nothing less from a family with such strong principles." Jake was watching this exchange like it was a tennis match, clearly trying to figure out what was really going on. Margaret consulted her clipboard. "Jake, how is Frank working out as part of your crew?" "He's solid," Jake said carefully. "Knows his way around restoration work." "I'm so glad to hear that. Frank, I hope you'll find this work more sustainable than your previous employment arrangement." Another carefully chosen word. She was reminding me that she knew about my multiple jobs, my financial struggles, and my dependence on employment that could be eliminated with sufficient pressure. "Mrs. Whitman," I said, setting down my hammer, "if you have something specific to discuss with me, maybe we should do it privately." "Actually, I think this is the perfect setting," she replied. "After all, your coworkers should understand the kind of man they're working alongside." Here we go, I thought. Time for the character assassination. "Frank is a devoted father who puts his daughter's welfare above everything else," Margaret continued. "Sometimes, though, devotion can become misdirected." Jake's expression was becoming concerned. The other workers were slowing down their tasks to listen. "Mrs. Whitman, for instance," she continued, "when Frank was offered an extraordinary opportunity to secure his daughter's educational future, he declined. Not because the opportunity wasn't legitimate, but because accepting help wounded his pride. The construction site had gone completely quiet. Now, as a result of that decision, his family is facing housing displacement. His daughter will likely need to change schools in her junior year, disrupting her academic preparation for college, all because Frank preferred the nobility of struggle to the practicality of accepting assistance. I felt every eye on the construction site focused on me. Margaret had just painted me as either a fool or a bad father, possibly both. "That's an interesting interpretation," I said. "Would you like to hear the alternative version?" Margaret's eyebrows raised slightly. "By all means. The alternative version is that when someone offers you something that seems too good to be true, it's usually because the real price is hidden in the fine print." I picked up my hammer again. "And when that same person happens to own your apartment building and evicts you 3 days after you decline their generous offer, the hidden price becomes pretty obvious." A few of the workers exchanged glances. Jake was starting to look like a man who'd accidentally wandered into a family argument. Margaret's composure didn't crack, but something shifted in her eyes. "Frank, I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "Am I?" "Because it seems like you've identified a neighborhood you want to redevelop, figured out which families might resist those changes, and devised a way to either buy their cooperation or eliminate their opposition. That's a very cynical interpretation." "Maybe, but cynicism tends to develop in people who've spent their lives being taken advantage of by people who have more money and power than they know what to do with." Margaret closed her clipboard with a sharp snap. "Gentlemen, please excuse this interruption. Jake, I trust you'll keep me informed about the project's progress." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me. "Frank, I hope you'll reconsider our previous conversation. For Emma's sake, if not your own." After she left, the construction site remained quiet for several long minutes. Finally, Jake walked over and handed me a bottle of water. Want to tell me what the hell that was about? I took a long drink and considered how much to explain. Rich woman with good intentions and bad methods tried to help my family. When I said no thanks, she decided to make sure I understood the consequences of refusing help. And you're okay working on her renovation project? I looked at the building we'd been restoring, then at Margaret's house 3 doors down. Jake, I need this job. And she needs this building renovated. As long as she pays what she owes and I deliver quality work, we don't have to like each other. But as I went back to work, I found myself thinking about the look in Margaret's eyes when I'd challenged her interpretation of the situation. Not anger exactly, more like the expression of someone who'd been outmaneuvered and was already planning their next move. Which meant this conversation was far from over. The break-in happened on a Tuesday night while Emma and I were at her school's college fair. We came home to find our apartment door ajar and our few valuable possessions scattered across the living room floor. My laptop was gone, along with Emma's tablet and the coffee can where I kept our emergency cash. About $400 that represented 6 months of careful saving. Dad, Emma whispered, standing in the doorway. What if they're still here? I checked every room, every closet, even under the beds. Whoever had done this was long gone, but they'd been thorough. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered, even our couch cushions slashed open. The police officer who responded was maybe 25 and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He took notes, dusted for fingerprints that probably wouldn't yield anything useful, and asked the standard questions. Any idea who might have done this? Former employee with a grudge? Ex-girlfriend? Anyone you've had disputes with recently? I thought about Margaret Whitman and her perfectly timed eviction notice. About the conversation at the construction site 3 days earlier. About the way she'd looked at me when I'd called her out in front of the other workers. No one I can prove, I said. The officer missed the distinction. Well, we'll file a report. But honestly, break-ins like this rarely get solved unless we catch someone in the act or recover stolen items from a pawn shop. After he left, Emma and I sat among the wreckage of our possessions and tried to figure out what was missing besides the obvious electronics and cash. Dad, my college application folder is gone. That stopped me cold. What was in it? Everything. Essay drafts, transcripts, the list of schools I was applying to, my personal statement. Emma's voice was starting to shake. Months of work, just gone. I looked around the apartment with fresh eyes, noting what had been taken and what had been left behind. My guitar was still there, worth more than the laptop. Emma's jewelry box was untouched, including the gold earrings that had been her mother's. But every piece of paper related to college applications, scholarship opportunities, or financial aid had disappeared. This wasn't random theft. This was targeted sabotage. Emma, go pack a bag. Clothes for a few days. Anything important you don't want to leave here. Where are we going? Somewhere safe while I figure out our next move. We ended up at the Hampton Inn downtown, paid for with my credit card that was already closer to its limit than I liked to admit. Emma sat on one of the double beds, staring at the wall, while I tried to calculate how long we could afford to stay in a hotel. Dad, who would steal college applications? They're worthless to anyone except me. Unless someone wanted to make sure you couldn't apply for college this year. Emma was quiet for a long moment. You think Mrs. Whitman did this? I think Mrs. Whitman is the kind of person who gets what she wants one way or another. But this is illegal. Breaking and entering, theft. She wouldn't risk that, would she? I looked at my 16-year-old daughter, still young enough to believe that wealth and respectability meant people followed the same rules everyone else did. Emma, when you have enough money and power, you don't usually have to do illegal things yourself. You just create situations where other people do them for you. So what do we do? That was the question. We could file a police report specifically naming Margaret as a suspect, but without proof. It would just be the accusations of a broke single father against a pillar of the community. We could try to reconstruct Emma's college applications from scratch, but that would take months we didn't have. Or we could do what Margaret clearly expected us to do. Give up and accept her original offer. We start over, I said. But this time, we're smarter about it. I pulled out my phone and called Jake. Morrison, it's 11 p.m. This better be good. Jake, I need a favor, a big one. What kind of favor? Someone broke into our apartment tonight. Took Emma's college applications, among other things. We're staying at a hotel, but I can't afford it for more than a few days. Jake was quiet for a moment. You think this is connected to your conversation with the Queen of King Street? I think timing is rarely coincidental. My guest room's yours for as long as you need it. But Frank, If you're going to war with Margaret Whitman, you better be prepared to win. Because people like that don't lose gracefully. The next morning, while Emma was at school, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Sandra Martinez, a journalist at the Charleston City paper, who specialized in investigative reporting on local development projects. I'd read her articles about questionable property acquisitions and suspicious zoning changes. Ms. Martinez, my name is Frank Morrison, and I think I have a story you might be interested in. The second call was to Tom Bradley, a lawyer who handled pro bono cases for working families. His office was in a strip mall, not a historic building, which suggested he might actually be on our side. The third call was to Margaret Whitman herself. "Frank," she said, answering on the second ring, "I heard about the unfortunate incident at your apartment. How terrible for you and Emma. Cut the crap, Margaret. We both know you didn't hear about it. You arranged it. That's a serious accusation. I hope you're not suggesting that I would engage in criminal activity. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating it directly. You had my daughter's college application stolen because you want to force us into accepting your offer." Margaret's voice remained perfectly calm. "Frank, I understand you're upset, but you're not thinking clearly. Why would I arrange a break-in when I could simply offer to help Emma reconstruct her applications? In fact, that's exactly what I'm calling to do." The audacity was breathtaking. She was simultaneously denying involvement and offering to fix the problem she'd created. "Let me be very clear about something, Margaret. You can evict us, you can steal our belongings, you can make our lives as difficult as you want, but you cannot buy us. And you cannot intimidate us into selling out. Frank, you're being dramatic. All I've ever wanted is to help your family. No, what you wanted was to purchase our cooperation in your development plans. When we wouldn't be purchased, you decided to destroy us instead." Margaret was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of grandmotherly warmth. "Frank, you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've been building this city while you've been living paycheck to paycheck. I've created opportunities for hundreds of families while you've been struggling to create opportunities for one. And that gives you the right to destroy the families who don't cooperate with your vision? It gives me the responsibility to do what's best for the community, even when individuals are too short-sighted to see the bigger picture." "Margaret, let me explain something about the bigger picture. You're about to learn that some families fight back, and when they fight back, they don't fight fair, because they can't afford to." I hung up before she could respond. Emma was right. This was bigger than we were, and we were probably going to lose. But sometimes losing on your own terms is worth more than winning on someone else's. The first photograph appeared in the Charleston City paper on a Thursday morning, above the fold, under the headline, "Foundation Director's Secret Investments." Sandra Martinez had done her homework. The photo showed Margaret entering a downtown office building that housed 3 companies, a construction firm, a property management company, and a nonprofit organization called the Charleston Future Development Initiative. All 3, according to Martinez's investigation, were wholly owned subsidiaries of Whitman Industries. The article explained how the Whitman Foundation would identify neighborhoods with development potential, offer scholarships and grants to influential families in those areas, and then use those families as community advocates for rezoning and development projects that coincidentally benefited Whitman Industries' real estate holdings. "Mrs. Whitman has created a sophisticated system for purchasing community support," Martinez had written. "Families who accept foundation assistance become unwitting advocates for development projects that ultimately displace their own neighbors." But the photograph that really caught my attention was on page 3. It showed Margaret having lunch with City Councilman Richard Hayes, who had voted in favor of every zoning change request that Whitman Industries had submitted over the past 5 years. The caption noted that Hayes' daughter had received a full Whitman Foundation scholarship to Duke University 3 years earlier. Emma and I were eating breakfast at Jake's kitchen table when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. "Frank, I think we need to talk." "Margaret, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. That article in the paper contains serious mischaracterizations of the Foundation's work. Actually, it contains serious documentation of the Foundation's actual work. Frank, you've set something in motion that you don't understand. This isn't just about you and Emma anymore. You're right. It's about every family you've manipulated over the past 40 years. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Meet me at Waterfront Park at 10 a.m. Come alone, so you can have me mugged and my phone stolen?" "Frank, if I wanted to hurt you directly, You'd know it by now. But there are things you need to understand about the situation you've created. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Waterfront Park at 10 a.m. was full of tourists taking pictures and families with small children feeding seagulls. Margaret was sitting on a bench facing the harbor, wearing a navy blue dress and looking like someone's grandmother enjoying a morning walk. "Frank," she said as I sat down beside her, "thank you for coming." "Let's skip the pleasantries, Margaret. What do you want?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I want to show you something that might change your perspective on this situation." Inside the envelope were bank statements, legal documents, and what appeared to be correspondence between various city officials and development companies. I scanned the pages, trying to understand what I was looking at. "These are communications between Palmetto Development Group and the mayor's office," Margaret said. "Palmetto is planning to build a shopping center and apartment complex in your neighborhood. They've already secured preliminary approval." I looked up at her, "And this is supposed to concern me how?" "Frank, Palmetto Development Group is owned by Marcus Crawford, who made his fortune building strip malls and low-income housing projects. When he's finished with your neighborhood, it won't be affordable family housing anymore. It will be either commercial development or luxury apartments that cost 3 times what working families can afford." She pulled out another document. "This is Crawford's timeline. Groundbreaking is scheduled for 6 months from now. Every family in your building and 4 other buildings in the area will be displaced, so you and Crawford are in competition for the same development opportunity. Frank, Crawford doesn't care about community impact or preserving neighborhood character. His projects maximize profit and minimize everything else. When he's finished, the families in your neighborhood won't just be displaced. They'll have nowhere affordable to relocate to." I was beginning to see the bigger picture, and I didn't like what I was seeing. "So your foundation's approach is what?" "The lesser of 2 evils. My approach creates opportunities for families to benefit from development instead of being destroyed by it. Emma's scholarship, your family support grants, they were designed to give you resources to thrive during neighborhood transition, not just survive displacement." Margaret reached into the envelope and pulled out one more document. This one made my blood run cold. It was a purchase agreement between Palmetto Development Group and the company that owned our apartment building, signed 3 weeks ago. "Margaret, how did you get this?" "Frank, I've been fighting Marcus Crawford's development plans for 18 months. When you've been in this business for 40 years, you develop sources, city clerks, real estate agents, construction workers who've worked for multiple companies. Someone who's seen what Crawford does to communities wanted me to know what he was planning. And you didn't think to mention this when you offered Emma the scholarship? Would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed I was making up a threat to manipulate you into accepting help?" She had a point. I would have assumed manipulation, because that's what I'd been trained by experience to assume when wealthy people offered assistance. My foundation's work in your neighborhood wasn't about purchasing community support. It was about building community resources strong enough to resist Crawford's plans. "But the eviction notice, the break-in at our apartment." "Frank, I didn't send that eviction notice. Crawford did. He's been systematically clearing buildings in preparation for development, and I strongly suspect he was behind the break-in, though I can't prove it." Margaret reached into her purse one more time and pulled out a thick folder. "Emma's college applications," she said. "Complete copies, including her personal statement and transcripts. I had my assistant request duplicates from her school yesterday." I stared at the folder. "Why would you help us if we've been working against you?" "Because, Frank, I've spent 40 years building this foundation to help families exactly like yours. I'm not going to let Marcus Crawford's greed destroy that work." Margaret stood up from the bench. "Frank, you have a choice to make. You can continue to fight me, in which case Crawford wins and your family gets destroyed along with your entire neighborhood. Or you can work with me to build something better. And if I work with you, what happens to families who can't afford to benefit from your development plans? They get relocated to comparable housing that the foundation purchases and maintains as affordable family housing. They get job training and placement services. They get healthcare and educational support." Margaret's voice became firm. "Frank, I'm not trying to eliminate working families from Charleston. I'm trying to create systems that allow them to prosper instead of just survive." I looked out at the harbor, trying to process everything I'd learned in the past 30 minutes. "Margaret, even if everything you're telling me is true, why should I trust someone who's been lying to me from the beginning?" "Because, Frank, I'm about to tell you the truth about something I've never told anyone else." She sat back down beside me, and for the first time since I'd met her, Margaret Whitman looked uncertain. The Whitman Foundation doesn't just help families like yours, she said quietly. It was created for families like yours, because 45 years ago I was exactly where you are now. Margaret's story began in 1978, when she was 28 years old and living in a rundown apartment building on Spring Street with her 2 young children. My husband had died in an industrial accident, she told me, staring out at the harbor. No life insurance, no savings, no family to help. I was working 3 jobs, cleaning office buildings at night, selling shoes during the day, and babysitting other people's children on weekends. The Spring Street building, according to Margaret, was owned by a development company that wanted to clear the entire block for commercial construction. They offered us relocation assistance, $50 per family and 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. In 1978, $50 wouldn't cover a security deposit on anything habitable. Margaret had organized the other tenants, contacted legal aid services, and fought the eviction for 8 months. They lost, but the fight had attracted the attention of Charles Whitman, a young lawyer who specialized in tenant rights cases. Charles was idealistic, brilliant, and completely impractical, Margaret continued. He helped us fight the eviction for free, lost his job at a big law firm because of the time he spent on our case, and ended up as broke as the rest of us. The Spring Street families were eventually displaced, scattered to apartments they couldn't really afford in neighborhoods far from their jobs and schools. But Charles and Margaret had fallen in love during the legal battle. We got married 6 months after we lost the case, Margaret said. Charles started his own practice, representing working families against landlords and developers. I managed his office and raised the children. Charles Whitman's law practice had grown slowly but steadily. He won cases, built a reputation, and eventually attracted clients who could afford to pay well for his services. By the early 1980s, the Whitmans were financially stable for the first time in their adult lives. That's when Charles had his idea for the foundation. He'd seen too many families destroyed by development projects they couldn't fight. He wanted to create a system that would give those families the resources to survive and thrive during neighborhood transitions. The Whitman Foundation had started small. Scholarships for displaced children, small business loans for families starting over, legal assistance for tenants facing eviction. But Charles had bigger ambitions. He realized that the only way to really protect working families from predatory development was to become developers ourselves, to buy properties before other companies could, and to manage development in ways that benefited existing communities instead of destroying them. By the 1990s, Whitman Industries had become one of Charleston's major property development companies. But unlike most developers, they built affordable housing, preserved historic buildings, and created mixed-income communities. Charles died in 2003, Margaret said quietly. Heart attack at his desk, working on a proposal to convert an old textile mill into affordable family housing. After Charles's death, Margaret had taken over both the foundation and the development company. For 20 years, she'd continued his work, identifying neighborhoods at risk of predatory development, building relationships with families in those areas, and creating resources to help them benefit from, rather than be victimized by change. Frank, when I met you and Emma on that bus, I wasn't testing your character. I was reliving my own history, a single parent working multiple jobs, raising a child with no safety net. Margaret pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. A young woman with dark hair and serious eyes standing in front of a rundown apartment building. That's me in 1978, the day we lost the Spring Street case. The resemblance to Emma was unmistakable. Margaret, why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Because, Frank, in my experience, when wealthy people tell poor people about their humble origins, it sounds condescending at best and manipulative at worst. She had a point, but now Crawford is threatening everything Charles and I built. He's identified the same neighborhoods we've been working to protect, and he has more capital and fewer scruples than we do. Margaret stood up from the bench and faced me directly. Frank, I need your help. Not just your cooperation, your active partnership. You know these communities in ways that I never can, despite my history. You understand the daily realities of families who live paycheck to paycheck. What kind of partnership? I want you to work for the foundation, not as a token representative of the community we serve, but as someone who helps design and implement our programs. Someone who makes sure we never lose sight of the families we exist to help. I thought about the construction job I'd been doing, the satisfaction of building something with my hands, but also the temporary nature of contract work. What about Emma's scholarship? Emma's scholarship was never contingent on your cooperation, Frank. It was always based on her character and potential. Though I'll admit, having a father who works for the foundation wouldn't hurt her application. Margaret reached into her purse one final time and pulled out a business card. Frank Morrison, Community Development Director, Whitman Foundation. I stared at the card with my name already printed on it. You were pretty confident I'd say yes. I was hopeful that once you understood what we're really fighting for, you'd want to be part of the solution. I looked around Waterfront Park, at the tourists and families enjoying a beautiful Charleston morning. At the harbor where ships had been bringing people to this city for centuries, most of them looking for the same thing Emma and I had been looking for, a chance to build something better for the next generation. Margaret, if I take this job, things are going to change. I'm not going to be a figurehead, and I'm not going to pretend problems don't exist just because they're inconvenient for foundation fundraising. Frank, I'm counting on things changing. That's why I need someone like you. 3 months later, Emma submitted her college applications to 7 universities. Her personal statement was about learning that kindness creates opportunities, but also that standing up for your principles sometimes requires accepting help from unexpected sources. I was working in an office for the first time in my adult life, reviewing community development proposals and visiting neighborhoods where families were facing the same choices Emma and I had faced. Some of those families were skeptical of the foundation's offers, which was exactly what I expected. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said to our former next-door neighbor, I know this sounds too good to be true, because that's what I thought when they first approached my family. Mrs. Rodriguez was sitting in her new apartment, which the foundation had helped her secure after our old building had been cleared for Crawford's development project. Mr. Frank, how do we know this won't change? How do we know they won't decide later they don't want to help us anymore? Because, I said, handing her the business card that still felt strange in my wallet, now there are people like us making those decisions. Margaret had been right about one thing. The real fight wasn't between rich people and poor people. It was between people who wanted to build communities and people who wanted to exploit them. And for the first time in Emma's life, we were on the side with resources to fight back. Emma's acceptance letter to the University of South Carolina came in April, along with notification of her full scholarship from the Whitman Foundation. She cried when she read it, and so did I. That evening, she asked me if I ever regretted refusing Margaret's original offer. Emma, I regret a lot of things in my life, but fighting for what we believed in, even when it looked like we couldn't win, that's not one of them. Sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as the worst possible timing. And sometimes the people you think are your enemies turn out to be the allies you didn't know you needed. But mostly, sometimes a $2 bus fare and a 16-year-old's kindness can change everything, as long as you're brave enough to fight for the change you want, instead of just accepting the change someone else has planned for you.